Hey guys, HackerSploit here, back again with another video, and in this video I'm going to be showing you how to set up your own virtualization server with Proxmox. Now I've already googled Proxmox here, and I'll sort of give you an idea of what it is if this is your first time hearing about Proxmox or a virtualization server. But the concept is really very simple to understand. You're essentially dedicating a piece of hardware or a group of system resources that could either be on a server. You could be running that on an old computer or a desktop that you have, and you're essentially dedicating those resources to running your virtual machines. Right, so the question is, why would you do this? And of course, the first thing is to offload that processing power onto another separate computer, server, etc. Whatever you have in mind in regards to your environment, that's perfectly fine. But you do need to take in your system resources. You need to take system resources into consideration, that is. By default, the reason I'm covering Proxmox is, first of all, it's completely open source, so you don't have to pay for anything. Although there is a subscription, but it is completely open source and it comes with enterprise features, right? So if you just Google for Proxmox, you'll get an idea of what it is, right? So it is a virtual environment and allows you to it allows you to host all your virtual machines, all your containers, and it's meant to be installed on a separate piece of hardware, right? So I've currently set up mine on one of my old desktops, which was essentially a server at one point, but it has quite good system resources and it's perfect for me. So 8 gigs of RAM, it runs a Core 2 quad, etc. And of course, depending on what you'll be storing on it, you can then expand your storage appropriately. I'm using about a 500 gigabyte drive, but again, it's really important that you take your system resources into consideration. By default, I would recommend having at least 4 gigs of RAM if you are going to use Proxmox, because if you don't have at least 4 gigs, then there is no point of actually having a virtualization server, because you can essentially then run it on your host. But we are trying to get rid of that. And you'll see the advantages of having a virtualization server like Proxmox very, very soon. So let's click on the link here and let's get an idea of what it is. Alright, so the latest version is Proxmox VE, which also stands for Virtual Environment, version 6. And right over here, it'll give you an idea of what it is. So Proxmox VE is a complete open source platform for enterprise virtualization. So it comes with enterprise features, but it's really, really easy for beginners to get into. And hopefully with this video, you'll be introduced to virtualization on a different level, not just on your host, right? Using hypervisors like VMware or VirtualBox. So it comes with a built-in web interface, which is what you guys saw in my previous Red Team video, that allows you to easily manage your VMs and containers, software-defined storage, and networking. So you also have high availability clustering if you want. But those are more enterprise features. For a beginner, you simply just want to get started. So we'll go into downloads. And in the download section, I would recommend getting the admin guide for version 6 if you're going to download that version. It's a really, really great manual for the version 6, for Proxmox version 6. So you can check all of these PDFs out. You then have the ISO files here. You also have version 5.4 if you are interested in that. You have a direct download and you have a torrent download. So you can go ahead and download the latest version right over here, and that'll download the ISO file for you. Now, when it comes down to installing it on your actual piece of hardware, you are going to do it through one of two ways. Of course, the first way is by doing it using a USB flash drive, and the second way is by burning the ISO file on the ISO image file onto a disk, right? And that may come in handy if you are planning to use this on a large scale environment. But again, USBs work perfectly fine. If you are planning to burn this or to write this on a USB, I would recommend using Blecher, or sorry, not Blecher, but Etcher. Etcher is the recommended tool for actually writing this installing Proxmox onto a USB. So you can use Etcher here, and this is the ISO right over here. Now, to demonstrate the installation process, I'm going to be utilizing a virtual machine, right? And I'm going to be using VMware, and I've already set up. So the system resources by default, I've kept it to 2 gigabytes of RAM, and this is just for the installation process. Once it's done, I'll take you through my own setup, where I'll be showing you all the features and how to navigate around the interface. Right, so I'm going to power this on. And again, you can ignore this. You should only be focusing on the installation. All right, so let me get rid of that, and this little notice right over here. All right, so the installation the installation wizard or the startup is very, very simple. So you can install it or you can run it in debug mode. And the great thing is it does come with the rescue boot option. So if you do lose your root password, you will be able to actually perform a rescue boot if you have a disk. So that's why I was essentially saying for many of the enterprise environments, software is usually burnt on disks so that they can roll back, or they have the ability to perform rescue boot, but you can do it through USB as well. But the reason they have disks is they can have different versions of the software, and older versions don't get deprecated, and as a result they're stuck with a problem. So let's hit install Proxmox, and it's going to start the installer, and it's going to then take us to the installation wizard where we can get started with the installation. The installation is very, very simple, and if you are using anything less than 2 gigabytes of RAM, you are going to get an error with the installation, because it does require at least 2 gigabytes of RAM for the installation process alone. Now again, given that this is a virtualization server, you are going to be having virtual machines that require various amounts or various resource requirements, so it's great to take that into consideration. No support for KVM virtualization. You can enable that in your virtual machine, but again, I'm taking you through the installation right over here. That brings me to the important thing that I missed or I didn't tell you, is that you do need to have virtualization supported on the processor, for your virtualization server. So I'm going to hit agree, and I'm going to hit next, and you can specify the disk you're installing it to right over here. If you have one disk, you can specify that right over there. You can also take a look at the options here and specify various things like the swap and the actual size if you are partitioning it directly. So you can do that as well. So I'm going to hit next. You then want to specify your country. I'm just going to hit next and specify a password, right? So I can say, for example, and this is your administration password, right? So that's very important to keep. That's something very important to take into consideration. So I'll just say Alexis at test.com and hit next. And now for your host name, you can leave that at, so if we can say pve.home. So we can say pve.home or pve.alexis.home. So let's just change it to that. And this is simply just your host name. .home on your local network. The IP address you can specify, and this is going to be done statically, and if you are doing that and you are setting this up on your network, you might want to reserve the particular address you have selected. So in my case, I like keeping this to 120 just to keep that as ambiguous as possible. And the net mask again is all dependent on your network and the subnet. This is perfectly fine for me. I'm going to hit next, and it's going to then ask you to actually verify all your settings, and once that is done, you can just hit install. All right, so I'll wait for this to complete installing, and I'll get back to you when this is done. All right, so the installation is successful, and we'll just hit reboot right now. So there we are, it's going to reboot, and I'll wait for this to complete rebooting just so that I can show you how it looks like when it's actually running, or we have the web interface running. So I'll just hit enter, and we'll wait for this to load up. Once it started loading up, it should load up all the modules and get the system ready. So there we are. We'll just wait for it to load up the web interface, and then we can get started with actually setting it up directly, as I thought that would be better, to essentially take you through the startup. So there we are. So you can see that it's going to give you this little welcome screen telling you that you can use your web browser to access and to configure the server from the IP that you configured earlier. So 192.168.1.120 with the port 8006. All right, so let me just open that up. All right, so when accessing your server for the first time, it's important to use the HTTPS protocol, even though you do not have an SSL certificate installed yet. It'll then ask you to, of course, to actually confirm that you want to accept the risk and continue. So we'll just accept that, and it should load up the virtual environment right over here, the Proxmox virtual environment. So again, you specify your username, which is going to be root, and the password that we specified during the installation, and you can leave everything as it is and hit login. All right, so once you've logged in, it's going to tell you you have no valid subscription. That's perfectly fine. Just hit OK. You will be faced with that message every time you actually get started. Now, this is your Proxmox virtual environment, and I know it may seem a little bit intimidating at the beginning, but it really is very, very simple to understand. So right over here, you have your server view. You can also change it to folder view. You can also change it to storage and to pool view. But for the best management, I think it's best to stick with the server view, although I do like the folder view as well. But again, we'll stick to the server. So you have your main data center, and then you have your PVE, which is your Proxmox virtual environment. You then have the local storage, which is right over here, and you then have your LVM, which is your logical volume management, which is going to be for all the disks or all the storage for your virtual machines, right? So your local storage is where you can start importing ISO files or any other installation medium for particular virtual machines. So you can do that by clicking on upload right over here, so specifying an ISO image or a container image, right? So if I wanted to upload an ISO, I could do it directly from here, and that's the way you get files onto your system, right? And you can do it directly from this web interface. All right, now when it comes down to creating a VM, you can go to the top right over here, so you can click on create VM and create container. But before we do any of that, for your local storage, you can also configure various permissions, right? So I can add group or user permissions, but we're going to stay out of that for now, because that is much more of an advanced feature set, which can be configured inside your data center settings. So your data center settings. So if you take a look at the summary gives you an overview of your system resources and the current nodes that are currently online. Right, so for example, in the health, you have the status. In terms of your nodes, you have the online nodes. We currently have one node online, which is PVE. And you can go ahead and take a look at the system resources that it's consuming. So 1 out of 4 CPUs, about 46% is being consumed by the system out of 2 gigabytes. So that gives you an idea of what is required. And the storage that we set is about 12 gigabytes, which to be honest is very, very little. And this would be only used to host minimal types of installations like containers, or if you wanted to host a Nextcloud installation. Right, so we'll be taking a look at all of these advanced options, but let's take a look at at a few options that may be useful to you, and that is of course backups. You can also add backups directly right over here, and you can create backup jobs, but more so I want to take a look at snapshots, because that's sort of the great thing that you can do pretty much with any other hypervisor, but more so with Proxmox. It's essentially one of the best snapshot management systems I've seen. So you can either upload an ISO, or you can take a look at their pre-built templates, which work extremely well, and I do recommend using them. So you might be saying, well, what templates do they have for us? So for example, they have their mail gateway, which you can use. They then have various configurations here. So they have Ubuntu, they have Debian, they have Fedora, they have CentOS. They essentially have every distribution or every open source distribution that you can think of for rapid deployment, right? So these are also, by the way, LXC, if you were wondering, and you have the various versions right over here. Right now, depending on the various templates that you want to use, you can also start importing. You can start importing turnkey Linux if you want, or the turnkey Linux containers. But let's say I wanted to go with Ubuntu, for example. You don't need to download the Ubuntu ISO file. You can just download it directly here. You also have Ubuntu 19.04 and 18.10 and 18.04, which is great. So you have all the versions that you want to use. You also have Arch Linux if you do want to spin up a quick Black Arch virtual machine. All right, so I can hit download Ubuntu 16.04 and hit download right over here. And that is going to start downloading, and I'll get back to you when this is done. All right, so we have just completed downloading the template for Ubuntu 16.04, and it'll give you this little task OK. Notice right at the bottom, and we can then close up this menu. By the way, if you take a look right over here at the bottom, you have your tasks and their task status, right? So if you do see a status processing, you should see this little loading bar right over here. So for example, when it was downloading, it was going to show me that status here. If it does fail, it will highlight it in red, and if it's okay, it'll tell you okay and in blue. right? So let's head over back to our data center, and if we go into our local storage here, you can see we have the template right over here. And if we want to install if we want to create our virtual machine, we can go into create our container, right? Because we then have the container template, which is right over here. So this is an LXC container. So this is the node that we're running it on, which is PVE. The container ID is 100. The host name, we can change that to, let's say, Ubuntu 16.04, and the password we will say is like so. You can also specify a public SSH key if you want to authenticate to the server via SSH. I do recommend doing that. If you already have a key that you've created, you can do it very, very easily. You then have the template, and this is where you specify the storage. As I mentioned, we're using the local storage, and the template is going to be highlighted right over here. So that is Ubuntu 16.04. We then have the disk, where you specify the disk, the storage location, which is again going to be in the LVM, or the logical volume management. So that's under LVM right over here. We'll just give this 8 because that's the maximum. I know this installation might not go through. Let's try 6. Hopefully that's enough for the installation. CPU, I'm going to go with 1 core, and memory we can say 512 megabytes, and the swap can be specified as well depending on your requirements. As for the network, you can also use DHCP IP assigning if you want, or you can assign one statically or manually, right? The name of the interface is going to be Ethernet 0, and the bridge, if you have created any other ones, will be listed here. By default, we're using the virtual machine bridge 0. And you can also enable a firewall access if you want. You can play around with the rate limiting, etc. for internet if you want to do that, and the DNS server right over here. So you have your DNS domain and DNS server, and once you're ready to go, we just hit confirm. You can take a look at all the summary of all your settings and hit finish, and we'll wait for that to set up. So it's going to start creating the journal. It's going to then extract the template that we downloaded. Now, if you do come into an error here that is commonly found, and that is the fact that you do not have enough permissions to extract the archive, that is primarily because you have set this container to be unprivileged, or to be privileged rather. So if you do run into that issue, you can always disable that within the configuration. So once it tells you that the task is okay, it means that the virtual machine is set up, and it'll be right over here under your PVE or your virtualized environment. So let me just close that up. Sorry, I double clicked on it. And again, you get a summary of your resource consumption. So you have all the status, the state, and the node it's running on, the CPU usage, memory usage, swap usage, and your boot disk size, which is about 6 gigabytes, right? You then have your CPU usage graph, network traffic, memory usage, and any notes right over here. As for your console, this is how to access the virtual machine via VNC, which is what I demonstrated in my previous video. So you can see it's telling us that the connection is failed, and that's because we haven't started the virtual machine yet. You can take a look at the resources, the network DNS, and any other options here, as well as snapshots. So for example, I can take a snapshot right now and say this is a vanilla installation. So I haven't made any changes to it. Sorry, that is vanilla, and hit take snapshot, and that's essentially done. So I have a snapshot right over here. Easy stuff. You then have the firewall, where I'll be getting into, which I'll be getting into in later videos. So let's go back to the summary, and let's start the virtual machine. Now remember, after starting the virtual machine, you can access it via SSH, or if you do want to access it via VNC, you can do that as well. So if you take a look at the status right over here, it tells us that it's okay, and you should see the system usage or the resource usage shoot up a little bit. So you can see memory usage has gone up a little bit. We have 0% of CPU usage. So if we go into the console right now, we're waiting for it to start up. So there we are. We can see VNC is connected. We're just going to wait for this container to start up. We'll give that a few seconds. So there we are. It is already started up, and the credentials that you will be using are your default credentials for your Proxmox virtual environment. So for example, the username is root, and the password we specified again within the configuration of this container, and immediately we're able to access Ubuntu. So again, I have config. You can take a look at the IP address we assigned by DHCP or through DHCP. And again, you can start configuring it. So again, you can install apt get update. Let's update our packages first. And again, it gets the latest packages and the repos all set accordingly. So that's pretty much how to use Proxmox, to set up a virtualization server. And I just wanted to take you through the basic flow of getting it installed and setting up your first virtual machine or your container. The great thing I like about Proxmox, it does give you the ability to use various templates, so you don't have to download it and then copy it to your virtual machine and then install it directly. Instead, you can simply use a container or a template to get it set up extremely fast. Right, so again, you can take a look at the system usage right over here. Now, again, it's not telling me CPU usage, and that's because I do not have KVM virtualization set up. But that's pretty much it, guys. That's all I wanted to demonstrate for this particular video. Let me know if you have any questions or suggestions. A follow-up blog post will be available on hssploit.com, which is our blog, and the forum at hackersploit.org, where you can find a detailed description of all that has been done so far. And yeah, if you have any questions, let me know in the comment section on my social networks or on the forum at hackersploit.org, and I'll be seeing you guys in the next video. Peace.